The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoneman and I'm your host on this program. On Perspectives, we take a look at a wide variety of issues that are important to folks here in Nashua. We live in this community and there are many, many issues that impact every one of us on a day-to-day basis. Today we're going to take a look at something that's been in the news recently, which you may have heard about, and that's the potential development, cleanup and development, I should say, of the old tannery site, the Mohawk Tannery site, which is on the inside bend of one of the curves in the Nashua River. A very, very pretty site. I've seen it from the air many times, but it's desolate really because of the toxic waste that remains in that area. So we're going to take a look at what might be done to clean it up and what might happen and as a potential development in the area. And with me to talk about it today are two residents from Ward 4 who live on Fairmount Street, Elizabeth Caswell and Rhiannon Robinson. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming in. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
So let's talk a little bit about what's happening down at the tannery. Tannery has been around for a long time. I was out walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors, as you were recently too. We can talk about all the knocking on doors you've been doing. And we're beginning to hear about some potential to improve really what could be a very pretty site, but is not developable because of how toxic some of the chemicals are there. Tell us a little bit about the tannery. First off, where is it exactly?
Yeah, so the tannery covers 30 acres that start very close to Broad Street and go all the way down to Nashua River, curve around and come close to what we would call Fairmount Heights, which is Fairmount Street where we live, and then Little Florida, which is the neighborhood just below us.
And part of that site is actually, there's some city-owned land right along the Broad Street Parkway.
Yes.
So if someone's driving down the Broad Street Parkway, coming from downtown, let's say towards Broad Street, as you get near that Broad Street intersection, you can look on the left and you can get a glimpse of the river, and just down beyond that bend is where the tannery is.
Yes. Yeah.
I was speaking with someone the other day who was confused on where the site actually was. There's also the old Beezer site, which is a creosote plant that's on the Merrimack River, not on the Nashua, the Merrimack River down by Greeley Park. That site is being cleaned up, and we'll hopefully have better access to that river as time goes on. There's a group that's working on that, and I think they're making great progress. But that's not the same place. Toxic chemicals there too,
Right.
but not the same. And actually, there's a lot of toxic materials in the ground in Nashua. As an alderman, you hear about this all the time. When someone's going to do a project, we always hear about asbestos. But we're not talking just about asbestos at the tannery site.
No.
Tell us about the tannery and what's there in terms of chemicals.
The tannery site, the tanning process has always used an awful lot of caustic chemicals. There's a lot of leaching that goes into the ground. They have two very large lagoons right up against the Nashua River that not only is contaminating the soil right around it, but it's also capable of contaminating the river adjacent to it, and everyone, of course, downstream from there. Chemicals that the most recent EPA report had listed as being elevated levels that are harmful to human health, either by soil contamination, if it gets kicked into the air, if it goes into the waterways. It includes, of course, asbestos, like you had mentioned. There's some from the tannery, there's some from the Fimple Door landfill, and there's rumors of illegal dumping of it on that property as well. Since it's already there, I think people tended to put it there as well. If that goes into the air and you inhale it, those very, very, very fine particles can work its way through your lungs and into the lining around your lungs, where it causes chronic inflammation, and ultimately, if you have enough or it festers for long enough, it can cause cancer. That's, if you've seen the commercials for mesothelioma, that's what asbestos causes. There's elevated levels of arsenic in the soil, which is a neurotoxin, a very persistent neurotoxin. I'm sorry, arsenic isn't a neurotoxin. It disrupts your metabolic pathways. So the mechanisms that your cell uses to make energy for the cell, it shuts it down straight out. So while it is a carcinogen as well, it's more likely to just cause severe toxicity and multiple organ failure. Things like manganese and barium, those are, the neurotransmitter or neurotoxins. There's lead in the soil as well. Dioxins, which are toxins, teratogens that causes problems in a developing fetus, and carcinogen as well. And there's a whole host of those in the soil at the moment as well.
That sounds pretty bad.
Not great.
It isn't great. I tell you, I went to the meeting that was down at City Hall last week, and it was eye-opening on some of the things that I heard, that some of the history and the kinds of things that do get dumped there. We live not far from that. We're just, on the other side of Amherst Street, really, just a few blocks away, and it's the same environment. And we've got a little boy at home now, and we don't want these kinds of things. And when I hear those chemical names, I hear things like arsenic, and barium, whatever those other things are, and carcinogens. It's clearly. It sounds like it's bad. And I understand, I don't know if it's scientifically shown, but I understand that there were higher cancer rates in that area in the city of Nashua. Has that been documented, do you know?
I do know that there were some high cancer rates in the area, and there was a survey done, but it didn't find any kind of correlation or a high enough to be blamed on the tannery. There was then another round of people suffering from cancer, people passing away. But by the time we could get another survey going, because we had considered that, most of those people that we did know who had cancer have either passed or people have moved out of the neighborhood. So it's not really something that we could base on. Also, we don't have access to their medical files. So it's really hard for us to prove that those are caused by the tannery and not just genetics or something like that.
Sure.
It can be hard to show that sort of thing anyway sometimes, simply because usually if you develop cancer because of exposure, it's not just because of one specific thing. It can be a whole host of things that just sort of overburdens you.
Sure.
And some of that might have come from the tannery, plus anything else they were environmentally exposed to elsewhere.
The tannery was around for a long time.
Yeah.
It started back around World War I era, I think.
1924.
1924, so a little bit after World War I, but it came all the way through, it was operational through 1984, is that?
1984, that's correct.
And then after that time, they kind of closed it off, but there were some workshops, auto repair shops, that kind of thing.
Which is not exactly the cleanest business in and of itself, too.
Right. And I think in defense of some of those folks, there's a lot of things that we know now that they didn't know then.
Sure.
And, they weren't wearing gloves, they weren't wearing masks, they weren't wearing, eye protection, that kind of thing. And when the chemical was done, toss it overboard, it just goes out. And now we're paying the price for these kinds of things, and that's why we hear about toxic cleanups and Superfund and all this sort of stuff all over the country, because it's clearly a large problem. As far as not being able to document it, I think you told me that the EPA showed up in hazmat suits one time.
They did.
That's documentation right there.
Right, yes.
If the guys who know what's going on show up in hazmat suits, that tells me that there's some kind of an issue here.
If nothing else, there's a very good, very credible suspicion that there's some awful stuff.
Yes, and it's fenced off. They got chain link fence, high chain link fence. And in fact, a number of years ago, I think Mayor Lozo, she raised those buildings so that now all that's left is a foundation, so there's no more temptation to try to use it for something else. It's just a scar, really. And like I said in the opening, I fly over that area all the time as a flight instructor. It's right under the final approach path to runway 32 out here at Nashua Airport. And it has the potential to be a beautiful site, but it's quite scarred right now. And anyone who were to drive down Fairmount Street and peer through the fence, if you want to get that close, and some folks live very close to it.
Yeah.
They really do.
Up against
right
it.
up against that fence.
Along, what is it, Warsaw Street right there?
Warsaw, and then
there's
the end
houses
of
on one
Huey.
side of the road, and there's not on the tannery side.
Right.
They are directly facing that site. And I have walked down to that gate and taken a look in a few times, not just when we were sort of looking around the place before we bought our house in September, but since then as well. And one of the things that strikes me is just what a nice spot it could be. There's trees overlooking it. It's a big open spot. The river's on the other side. There's definitely wildlife. I've seen deer in our neighborhood.
Oh, nice.
It could be a very, very nice spot, and it is just a big fat scar. Unusable scar.
Yeah, and you do have a very nice neighborhood too, by the way. When I was walking down there, it's quiet and it's peaceful. It's a great place for kids. Not much traffic. It's really nice. Houses are well maintained, pretty, and it's just
pride.
Yeah.
People there are proud, and I think it's great. So we have all this going on down there, and now the EPA seems to be getting involved, and you folks learned about it, and you started to understand, want to find out what's going on. You've met with the mayor, you've met with the EPA, at least
Yes.
that meeting last week, and you formed a new organization.
We did.
Called the New Civic Association, New Nashua Civic Association, if I've gotten that correct. Tell us a little bit about that. What's the genesis for that, and what are your goals?
Yeah, so we're a group of neighbors, and we got together really just to find out what we all wanted as a group and how to advocate for ourselves, because it's really hard being so spread out and everybody, wanting to see this clean, but not necessarily having an outlet or a way for our voices to be heard. So we came together and we partnered with the Toxics Action Center, which is out of Boston, and they're really helping us to get our voices heard. So our ultimate goal is complete excavation of all toxic substances and then off-site disposal. So instead of burying it in the ground and making us a toxic landfill, having a site that is designed specifically to house these things safely would take our chemicals.
I see. So the EPA is involved and wants to do something here, but we're concerned about what exactly they want to do.
Yes.
Because anytime we have cleanup issues, multiple things can be done. I will tell you that in the city of Nashua, in many cases with asbestos, it's buried in place. Asbestos, I believe, is a natural mineral, natural material. And so it came out of the ground, it's still in the ground, it's buried and it's left there, and if it's not disturbed, it's going to be okay.
To my understanding, as long as it doesn't fragment and go into the air, it's perfectly fine. Lots of houses were insulated with it.
Sure.
It was a great, insulated and shingled with it. It's all over the place. It's under a
Yes.
lot of people's vinyl siding at the moment too.
Right.
And it's fine.
It's
where it
perfectly
sits.
fine.
Yeah.
It isn't a liquid, and it's in its current temperatures, natural temperatures.
Right.
So it's not going to seep into the soil. It's just you just don't want to break it apart and
Right.
get the dust and breathe the dust.
Of course, during construction of a development in that site, it would go up into the air as dust. During
Sure.
any kind of cleanup effort, regardless of what the EPA goes with, that dust will go into the air, and some
Sure.
of that will become airborne.
But it's quite different in this case. So the EPA has been considering, actually, they've been looking at this site for a long time.
I think we're at upwards of 20 years now.
Yeah.
Really, wow, long time.
Yeah.
There are quote Superfund sites out there across the country. What is a Superfund site? Does this qualify as a Superfund site? Is it large enough and bad enough, or what's the deal? Because the EPA has federal funding, and they can come in and they can purge all this stuff out there. Is that an option for us here?
Oh, in the year 2000, the EPA and the DES got together to consider putting it on the national priorities list, which would make it a Superfund site. But after weighing out all the pros and cons and realizing that because our site is so small and it's stable at the moment. The lagoons are leaching a little bit into the groundwater for contamination, but the river is not immensely impacted. They're considering it stable. So they decided not to put it on the national priority list because they were hoping that there would be other opportunities if a developer came along once the Broad Street Parkway went in, that they would have enough money to clean it up without being listed on the Superfund website.
Because the Superfund list is larger, generally speaking, larger
Right.
dumps, essentially, and much more toxic, and maybe a larger impact to groundwater. And while this is critically important to the city of Nashua and to the neighbors, it's not on the same level as some sites might be in other parts of the country. And there are limited funds. So the EPA thought a developer might come along, because it's really the responsibility of the owner of the facility to make it clean. Now, the current owner, I understand, is bankrupt, defaulted on taxes, and it just they're holding the paper, but that's it. There's nothing that can be
Seems
done.
to be the case. I have to assume that if something could have been done or something could have been extracted, it would have been done by now.
I would think so.
It's been a very long time.
It's been a very long time. So if a developer were to come along and try to turn this land into something useful for the city, something that would develop our communities, develop the economy, develop the neighborhood, help us develop the river, these kinds of things, then the EPA can come in and can advise what should be done. And they did that apparently back in early 2000s. They
Yes.
came out with a proposal, and out of the various alternatives that were available, they chose one as being obviously the best. And what was that proposal?
Full excavation and clean out of the site,
What
So-
we're asking for.
which is what we're asking for now.
Yeah.
It's what they recommended back in 2000, 2001, and we'd like them to stick with that. The full excavation and clean out is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to remove the contaminants and ship them to some place that's designed to handle them. If there's a major flood, it's not going to leach anything toxic into the river or into the local groundwater. The soil's going to be disturbed regardless of the method of cleanup, so this theoretically wouldn't disturb the site or aerosolize anything that wouldn't be aerosolized anyway. And it would mean that, if/when we would very much like for a playground or something to go to at least part of that. If there's a playground and a kid eats a little dirt, you're not going to worry about what that's going to do to him 20 years down the line.
Right.
It's really, really the safest option for both the human health and for wildlife in the river as well.
Right. It's certainly the most complete, and it makes logical
yeah.
sense. You just remove it. It gets it back to the state that it was before the tannery ever existed, before anything was dumped there.
Right.
And from my perspective, listening to it, certainly from the meeting that we had at City Hall last week, that sounds to me really to be the best. And I don't think anyone disputes that. It sounds like everyone is pretty much agreeing that would be the best thing. There was a price tag associated with that back in 2002.
Right.
That was about $23 million for that cleanup, which means that anyone coming in 2002, now of course we're in 2018, 16 years difference, numbers change, someone would have had to have said, well, I can build something that's going to be worth X, and if I take the $23 million out, because whoever buys that land, they're the ones who are going to be responsible to clean it. They didn't make it messy, but they're going to be responsible to clean it. So the numbers, for whatever reason, didn't work because no one came along and wanted to do it. So now it looks like a developer has come along and said that he wants to get involved and do something for the city. And I think that the city recognizes the benefit. But the EPA story has changed a little bit. What is the EPA saying currently?
They'd like to encapsulate. They'd like to They basically like to cap the contamination that's there, push it all into one place. Basically, right now there's two big lagoons that comprise most of the contamination, so sort of push everything down towards those lagoons where it's dirtiest anyway, cap it on top, cap it on the sides, and then put up basically like a retaining wall, a secant wall, that keeps it from leaching into the Nashua River. There's no barrier beneath it, so if there is sufficient rainfall or something, it could sort of leach liquids through it. And it's designed to withstand a 100-year flood, according to that meeting.
I think they said a 500-year flood.
500-year flood, yeah, okay, a 500-year flood.
But still.
Those are happening more than once every 500 years these days, isn't it?
Well,
way,
it's very hard to say. I
seems
mean, how do you
to-
predict a 500-year flood?
Sure.
It's very, very hard. And there's no doubt that the one and done approach is one and done. You dig it up, you take it away, it's gone. The problem is solved. Future generations don't need to worry about it. Kids can play there, and we don't need to worry about what might be residual there. But anytime we're capping it, there's always a concern of what might somehow make its way out. And there's
Will make
maintenance.
its way out
It will
eventually.
make its way out. Because nothing is permanent. No structure, no human structure is permanent. It just doesn't work that way.
Nature
Buildings
always
just
takes
aren't.
things back.
Right, exactly. Nature takes them back,
Yeah.
and that will happen here too. So eventually, just like a foundation cracks or your ceiling cracks in a living room, we got little cracks in our living room. That's what I'm thinking about. Where'd that come from? I wasn't here yesterday.
Right.
But these things just settle, and these things happen. So anything that we do that is just kind of a containment option will have to have maintenance over the course of time. And logically, you would expect that the maintenance responsibility or difficulty or cost would probably increase over that period of time too.
Yes.
So we hear that phrase, kicking the can down the road, a lot.
Yeah.
This option, it sounds like it might solve an immediate need in some sense, but it's still sort of kicking the can down the road because the problem is not truly solved.
Contamination is still there. It's going to be shored up using technology that it's just going to fail eventually. It might take a while, but it's going to fail or crack. It's going to require manpower and maintenance in the meantime. And it requires a substantial amount more monitoring in the meantime as well.
Sure.
They're going to need to keep an eye on the soil a lot more closely, on the water more closely, and that's more money. This capping strategy, on the outset, it's going to cost a little bit less money, that's true, but I'd find it very, very hard to believe that with cost overruns that seem to happen with every major construction project,
do.
all the manpower for maintenance, upkeep, and monitoring, it's gonna at least be a wash eventually.
Sure.
Well,
I'm
and
sorry, go ahead.
If I could, the capping that they're proposing has been used, but it's been used in landfills. So we're talking about solid waste and not sludge. And what the lagoons are full of is sludge.
I see.
So really these walls have been shown to leak in landfills with dry solid waste. Once you have them surrounding liquid waste, even if they're encapsulated and covered, they're gonna leak.
They are, because a molecule of water is very tiny,
Yes.
you know, and something that's an object, you know, in a solid waste landfill may not go through a small hole, but
Right.
water will find its way through, and water will carry some of these chemicals through.
Well, and if we don't clean up these lagoons, because we do have groundwater contamination, the groundwater is going to continuously be receiving more contaminants. It'll never be clean.
Right.
It'll never be usable.
Right.
But if we remove this stuff, it will clean itself up.
Right. Let's talk just about some of the numbers now, because I mentioned the $23 million number from back in 2002. Now we're in 2018, and they've kind of brought these numbers into the present. And the cost for the complete removal, or the estimate for the complete removal, excavation, take it away, is around 32 or 33 million right now, I think. Again, we don't know what the ultimate cost would be because cost overruns. And the other option, the encapsulating option, is around, say, 8 to 14?
I believe
Was
it's
that
8
the
to
number?
14,
Okay,
yeah.
so it's still a lot of money either way, and there's an order of magnitude difference there. But once again, the take it away option doesn't require any further maintenance.
Right.
And that's going to be the trick, because understanding where the money might come from to fund this, not only to fund the work now, today, let's say, but to fund the maintenance, these are all important considerations. All right, let's talk a little bit about what might happen in that space and what the benefit might be to the city of Nashua. I'll start out too by saying that as I was flying over the other day, and of course I see that site, but I saw a guy on a boat in a river. He apparently was fishing. This is it can be a recreational spot. Our rivers, I think, are a big part of the Nashua brand, a big part of who we are. We got two beautiful rivers, and we can hardly see them from many locations. And to increase the access, I think, to rivers for recreation, that can be biking along a path or walking or a little bit of boating, is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. We need to take advantage of that. That's a big part of who we are as a city. It's our natural resource, and when we start trying to sell the city, we need to take a look at what do we already have, rather than try to build something new that we don't have yet. Let's take, what do we have? What do we have that we can use to attract folks? And I think one of the things that we have is the river. So what do you think you might like to see as neighbors? What would you like to see in that space, do you think?
We want a park for our kids.
Yeah.
We want a park right at the end of Fairmount Street. We would be so happy.
Okay.
But I know that when they first started talking about putting in the Broad Street Parkway, they said, how can we use the Broad Street Parkway to get to the tannery, to get it cleaned up? They were kind of going in tandem with that.
Okay.
You couldn't clean up the tannery without the parkway, but you could have the parkway without cleaning up the tannery. Now they have access, and they were saying that it would be fantastic to have a footbridge that goes from the tannery area, once it's cleaned up, that goes straight over to Mine Falls.
That'd be wonderful.
There's dog paths, bike paths, playgrounds,
Right.
so much.
Closer to downtown, too, there's a short river walk section. And this tannery site, if there were river walk that were built along the Nashua River there, it could meet up with the downtown. It
Sure.
could provide a lot more access to pedestrians on foot to the downtown area. Really bring in some good money and revitalization to that downtown Main Street core.
Absolutely.
It's a huge attraction to the
I
town.
understand years ago there was a boat, little river boat that you could buy a ticket on and you could ride up and down.
Oh, yeah, I'd heard about that,
And there's the fountain you can see from the Main Street Bridge in the Nashua River. And it'd be great to see, some kind
a
of
beautiful area.
ability to connect all these things, either on water or on foot along the side. Realistically speaking, a developer is not going to spend this money for a park.
No.
Okay, so there's going to be something else
No.
there. Maybe housing development. We've read recently about the shortage of quality housing in the city.
I'd be thrilled to see housing.
It
at the
sounded
end
like
there,
they were
yeah.
looking for high density living situations, so multi-level apartments that are right on the river, that would
Condos
be
along the
right
river.
by a park. That it would just be great.
It
And
would be great.
in order to really get the city on board, just think about that place hasn't paid taxes in 30 years,
Right.
and now all of a sudden it's developed and they can finally get some revenue.
And
Right.
if you have multi-level properties on top of a hill overlooking downtown and the river with that beautiful view, I mean, I'm not an engineer or a developer, but I can look at that site and go, that would be great.
Right, there's a lot of potential there.
There's a ton of potential
Yes,
there.
yes.
You could certainly stand to see an awful lot of tax revenue coming in from some place
Sure.
like that.
Sure, and tax revenue can help pay for some of the development, some of the cleanup we're talking about doing. Because
Yeah, I don't see why not.
if the bill for a complete cleanup before was $23 million and no developers bid on that, basically. Now, there was no Broad Street Parkway at the time, so now there's much better access.
Yes.
It may be hard to convince someone that they have to come up with $30 million to do it today. I don't really know what the property is worth. It's so hard to say what a piece of property is worth. There are experts that can value these kinds of things, but still, it's kind of a guess. So we'll have to figure out some way to influence the EPA to get them to, again, recommend the complete clean out, and then figure out how it might be paid for. But the land does have a lot of potential, and it's potential for your neighborhood, it's potential for a park, for the folks that might live there, but it's potential really for the city. And
that parcel of land would connect a lot of neighborhoods to a lot of other places within
Right.
the city, especially for, we have the new VO bike program. You could, it provides access to bicycles, to pedestrians. It's just an invaluable little
It is.
keystone in
Once they
the
finish-
middle of the city.
Once they finish the theater downtown, you could
Oh,
walk
that's right,
to a
yeah.
show,
There you
go
go.
have
Right.
dinner and a show,
There you go.
right on Main Street.
yeah,
Right.
all kinds of things can be done. Well, we are nearly out of time. This time goes by very, very quickly here. Is there anything you want to add, contact information, anything you want to say to folks in the last minute that we have here?
Yeah, if anybody would like to reach out to me to join our organization or get more information about it, they can email me at elizmcaswell@gmail.com.
And of course, you have a Facebook page too, and they can find you there.
We do, and it's New Nashua Civic Association. We have a page and a group, and we welcome people to join both. We're also sending around a petition to ask the EPA to fully clean up. We've collected over 250 signatures
Wow,
so
great,
far, and
great.
the more support asking for permanent cleanup, the better.
Okay, I think permanent cleanup sounds like clearly the best solution. It's as one who doesn't live too far away from it either, I think, and for the city of Nashua, I think it's really probably the best way to go for the future. Well, thank you both very, very much for coming in. I really
Thanks for
appreciate it,
having us,
and
yeah.
you'll have to come back sometime and let us know how this is all developing, because it's an important issue for the city.
Yes.
So thanks very much.
Yeah,
Thank
we'd be
you.
thrilled.
I want to thank you folks too at home for tuning in. I'm speaking here with Elizabeth Caswell and Rhiannon Robinson, who are residents in Ward 4 along Fairmount Street near the old Mohawk Tannery, and very concerned, as we all are, with what can be done to clean that space up appropriately and what we might see in the future as a new development there. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Any questions or comments, please reach out, davidschoneman.com. Thank you. Bye-bye.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.